They had barely touched down on a narrow strip of volcanic glass near the coastline when the ground betrayed them. A deep, guttural rumble rolled through the earth. The lander rocked violently. "Seismic activity!" Steve shouted, gripping the controls. The quake hit like a hammer from the gods. The black rock beneath them split open with a deafening crack. Fissures raced across the landing zone like lightning. Seble and Steve sprinted out of the craft just as the entire plateau began to rise. The ground itself was lifting, an enormous tectonic plate groaning upward into the sky at terrifying speed. Rock and ash cascaded around them as the platform surged higher and higher, hundreds of meters in seconds. The lander slid backward, tilting dangerously before vanishing over the newly formed cliff edge. "Hold on!" Steve yelled, grabbing Seble's arm as they scrambled for purchase on the rising slope. The ascent finally slowed and stopped with a bone-jarring lurch. They now stood on a sheer, newly formed cliff thousands of feet above the roiling ocean below. The drop was catastrophic. Even their advanced nano-suits couldn't guarantee survival from that height. The impact forces would be overwhelming. Seble looked down, wind whipping her helmet. "No way down, the walls are almost vertical." Steve scanned the cliff face. "No handholds. If we fall, we're paced." The planet was not finished with them. From orbit it had looked like an emerald veiled in golden smoke, a world of impossible geology where the very crust seemed alive. Now they understood why. This was a shifting world, a planet in constant tectonic torment. Massive supercontinents drifted and collided at accelerated speeds. Entire landmasses rose and fell like breathing lungs. Rivers of molten stone fed into one colossal, dark ocean that dominated the hemisphere like a living heart. Strange life exploded around them in hyperspeed. Plants burst from cracks in the rock, bloomed in seconds with iridescent flowers, released clouds of glowing spores, then collapsed into nutrient-rich mulch. Flocks of glass-winged creatures wheeled overhead, screeching as if warning the ground itself was untrustworthy. The explorers had no choice but to move along the narrow ridge of the risen plateau, searching for any possible descent. The wind howled. Distant volcanoes erupted in unison, painting the golden clouds blood red. Then the ground trembled again. A new fissure opened directly beneath them. Steve grabbed Seble and dove forward as the rock behind them sheared away, plummeting into the abyss. They crawled desperately across unstable ground, the cliff edge crumbling under their hands and knees. "Steve, the lander," Seble pointed. Far below, half buried in fresh lava flows, their disc-shaped craft lay wrecked and smoking. The rising plateau had torn it from its landing zone and dropped it into the volcanic chaos. "We're stranded," Steve said grimly. Worse was coming. As they inched along the precarious ridge, the planet's hyper-evolution turned against them. Carnivorous vines erupted from the rock, whipping toward them with thorned tendrils. Seble slashed at them with her combat knife, while Steve provided covering fire. One vine wrapped around his ankle, yanking him toward the edge. Seble severed it just in time, pulling him back from the drop. The golden clouds above began to swirl violently. A massive atmospheric pressure shift triggered a sudden storm, howling winds mixed with superheated ash and exotic gases that made their suit filters scream in protest. They finally reached a narrow, crumbling natural bridge connecting to a lower plateau. The bridge was barely wide enough for one person. Below it, a river of molten stone flowed sluggishly toward the dark ocean. Halfway across, the bridge began to collapse. "Run!" Steve roared. They sprinted as the stone disintegrated beneath their boots. Seble leaped the final gap, rolling across the far side. Steve jumped a split second later, grabbing her outstretched hand as the last section fell away into the lava. They collapsed on the far plateau, gasping for breath inside their suits. But the shifting world had one more surprise. In the distance, a new volcanic island was literally rising from the superocean. Steam and fire exploding upward as fresh land was born in real time. The entire planet was a living engine of creation and destruction. Seble clutched the side of the cliff, staring at the impossible vista. "We came for answers," she whispered, "but this world doesn't give answers. It only changes the question." Steve looked at their distant, ruined lander and the hostile, ever-shifting landscape surrounding them. 48 hours until the wormhole reopens," he said, "if this planet doesn't kill us first." The ground rumbled again beneath them, as if laughing at their defiance. And somewhere, in the golden clouds above, new storms were already forming. Exhausted and battered from the rising plateau, Seble and Steve descended into a vast, blinding white expanse, an endless salt flat that stretched in every direction under the brutal sun. At first glance, it looked manageable. A distant mountain range shimmered on the horizon like a promise of safety and higher ground. "We can cross this in a couple of hours," Steve said, wiping sweat from his brow inside his helmet. "Easy." They started walking. Hours passed. The mountain never got closer. What they had mistaken for a modest salt plain was an optical illusion on a planetary scale. The flat was unimaginably massive, a shimmering white desert of crystallized minerals that reflected the sun with merciless intensity. Their suits' cooling systems strained under the glare. The air shimmered with heat haze, turning the world into a disorienting mirage. Every step crunched on salt that looked like snow, but burned like fire when it found gaps in their suits. "We've been walking for 6 hours," Seble said, voice tight. "That mountain should be right in front of us." Steve checked their suits' inertial navigation. "We've covered nearly 40 kilometers. It's still the same distance away. This whole plane is playing tricks on us." Dehydration set in faster than expected. Their water recyclers couldn't keep up with the extreme heat and exertion. Hallucinations began at the edges of their vision, phantom oases, moving shadows, the distant echo of their own lander's engines. Strange salt formations rose like twisted sculptures, some resembling ancient alien statues that seemed to watch them as they passed. Night finally fell, bringing a temporary drop in temperature, but no relief. They collapsed on the hard salt crust, backs against each other for security, watching alien stars wheel overhead through the golden clouds. Bioluminescent microbes in the salt glowed faintly around them, creating an eerie, ghostly carpet of light. Sleep was restless, haunted by the constant low rumbling of the ever-shifting planet. Dawn brought new horror. The mountain was still far away. They walked for several more agonizing hours under the rising sun, legs burning, throats parched, until they finally staggered into the foothills. The ground here was unstable, fractured by fresh fissures and new volcanic vents. Steam rose from cracks in the earth, but their ordeal was only beginning. They reached the edge of a deep gorge where they had last seen signs of their original lander. Far below, half buried in rock and fresh mud, the silver hull lay crushed and broken. Before they could even process the loss, the tide from the great dark ocean surged inward with terrifying speed. Churning black waves flooded the gorge, swallowing the wreckage in moments. "No, no, no!" Steve's voice cracked with despair, hands pressed against his helmet. Seble tried her comm again. "Control, this is Seble and Steve. Do you copy?" Only thick static answered. The dense, hostile atmosphere swallowed their signal completely. They were truly cut off from any hope of immediate rescue. Seble's voice remained steel. "Then we survive. That's what we were trained for." Above them, glass-winged creatures screamed as if mocking their plight. The planet was alive, restless, and hungry. The first drops of rain hissed against Seble's suit. At first, they thought it was salvation. Then the droplets struck the rocks with sharp, sizzling pops, releasing white smoke. Acid rain, the downpour intensified into a burning deluge. Their suits' integrity warnings flashed red as the corrosive liquid ate away at the outer layers. They sprinted desperately along the gorge rim, searching for shelter. A dark cave mouth appeared in the cliff face ahead. They dove inside just as the storm reached its peak, the acid rain roaring like a waterfall outside. Inside the cave, a strange glow greeted them. In the center lay a shimmering pool of liquid that pulsed with impossible colors: emerald, crimson, and liquid gold. It rippled as though alive, casting hypnotic patterns across the walls. "Beautiful," Seble whispered, stepping closer. Steve grabbed her wrist. "Don't. The readings are off the charts. That's pure acid. It would eat through our suits in seconds." Even beauty on this world was lethal. They waited out the storm in tense silence. When they finally emerged, the planet had shifted again. What had been a cave at ground level was now perched high on a newly raised hill. The shifting world had rearranged itself overnight. "We climb," Steve said. "Higher ground, better chance at a signal." They scaled the unstable slope, rocks crumbling beneath their boots, fresh fissures opening without warning. At the summit, Steve tried the comm once more. "Control, this is Team Delta. Do you copy?" Static. Then a faint reply. "Delta, we read you. Coordinates locked. Dispatching rescue lander." Relief washed over them. From their vantage, they watched a new disc-shaped lander descend through the golden clouds. From their vantage, they watched a new disc-shaped lander descend through the golden clouds toward the shoreline. It touched down gracefully on the dark sand. But as they began their careful descent toward it, the ground trembled violently once more. A new volcanic vent erupted nearby, sending a fountain of molten rock skyward. The planet was not ready to release them. Seble and Steve ran toward their only hope of escape as the shifting world continued its endless, merciless transformation around them. The rescue lander's engines hummed with promise, but Dalol, as the explorers had begun calling this restless world, had one final betrayal in store. Seble stood on the ridge, watching the disc-shaped craft settle on the dark shoreline below. Relief flooded her, for the first time in days. Then her eyes drifted to the horizon. "Steve." Her voice tightened with dread. "The ocean." The murky, oil-black sea was rising, not gradually but violently, as if the entire planet were inhaling. Massive waves surged forward, clawing at the beach with unnatural speed. The water level climbed dozens of meters in seconds, drawn upward by some colossal tectonic shift deep beneath the superocean. "Move!" Steve roared. They threw themselves down the unstable slope in a desperate sliding sprint. Freshly formed rocks crumbled beneath their boots. Loose gravel turned into miniature avalanches. Behind them, the roar of rushing water grew into a thunderous wall of sound. The rescue lander's legs were already knee-deep in the surging tide. When they reached it, Seble vaulted onto the lowering ramp, nearly slipping on the wet metal. Steve shoved her forward with all his strength before hauling himself up after her, the dark water lapping at his heels. The hatch slammed shut just as a massive wave crashed against the side of the craft, rocking it violently. "Lift off! Now!" Steve yelled at the pilot controls. The lander's engines screamed in protest as it tore free from the grasping sea. Through the viewport, they watched the beach and the entire coastline disappear beneath churning black waves. Another section of the ever-shifting continent was swallowed in real time. Inside the cockpit, both explorers collapsed into their seats, helmets fogged, chests heaving. Adrenaline still pounded through their veins. "We barely made it," Seble whispered, clutching the armrest. "This planet doesn't just change, it consumes." The journey back to orbit was tense, the lander fighting through turbulent golden clouds and sudden atmospheric pressure spikes. When they finally docked with the main ship, the silence of the station felt almost alien. Back in the debriefing room, General Rice's face filled the large screen. At first, he was all sharp smiles. "Excellent work on Dalol. The preliminary scans show resources beyond imagination, rare minerals, exotic gases. That massive ocean alone could fuel entire fleets. The agency is impressed." Then his expression darkened. "But you abandoned the mission after barely 1 day on the surface. 48 hours of planned exploration reduced to a panicked retreat. Where are the detailed samples? Where is the comprehensive data? You risked a lander and came back with almost nothing." Seble stepped forward, her voice steady, but edged with exhaustion. "With respect, sir, that planet is fundamentally unstable. The ground rises and falls overnight. Acid rain corrodes suits in minutes. Entire land masses are born and drowned while you watch. We couldn't risk staying longer or sending a second lander. It would have been suicide." "Incompetence is what I'm hearing," Race snapped, slamming his hand on the console. "If you can't handle one unpredictable world, I'll send Team Alpha. They'll do the job properly and bring back everything we need." Steve's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. Race leaned closer to the camera, eyes cold. "Rest up. You leave in 24 hours for your next assignment. Dismissed." The screen went dark. In the quiet corridor outside, Seble and Steve stood shoulder to shoulder, staring out at the blue curve of Earth far below. Seble finally spoke, her voice low. "Dalol wasn't just a planet, it was a warning, a living reminder that some worlds are too volatile, too alive, to conquer." Steve nodded grimly, the weight of their narrow escape still heavy on his shoulders. "And nobody up here is listening." Far behind them, across the wormhole, the shifting world continued its endless dance. New mountains rose from the super-ocean, fresh acid storms swept across salt flats. Glass-winged creatures screamed into the golden clouds as another continent crumbled, and a new one was born in fire. Some planets are not meant to be explored. They are meant to remind us how small we truly are.